Get ready, because I'm making this up as I go. Last week I did a video on the worst scene from every Indiana Jones movie, and now it's time to look at the best scene from each film. We'll go from movie to movie in order of release. I'll pick a scene from each, and I'll explain why I believe it's the best. We'll start with Raiders, of course, and this one was a tough pick. The whole movie is basically one legendary scene after another, and you could easily just close your eyes, pick one at random, and get a winner. First off, you have the Temple Run, then the shootout at Marion's Bar, the chase through the streets of Cairo, the confrontation with Belloc, the mechanic fight, the truck chase, the love scene aboard Katanga's ship. I mean, how do you pick just one? Well, the way I did it was by asking myself the question, when does this movie peak? When does it hit a point where everything that comes afterward feels weaker by comparison? And for me, the answer is the truck chase. This scene is off the charts. It opens with Indy stealing a horse like it's Grand Theft Auto Egypt, then he hunts down the truck holding the Ark and invites himself in. From there, it's pure fun. Indy eliminates one Nazi after another, acting like an army of one as he runs multiple vehicles off the road. And I can't talk about this scene without mentioning the grin on his face every time he destroys someone. It's a small detail, but it adds so much charm to his character and the scene as a whole. But just when we start feeling comfortable, Indy gets shot and things get serious. This flips the scene on its head, and next thing you know, he's thrown out of the truck and barely hanging on. The Nazis threaten to crush him between two vehicles, and he shocks the world by crawling under the truck. From there, he latches onto it with his whip and climbs back aboard. It's not only ridiculous, it's ridiculously good, and it launches Indy into iconic status as he retakes control of the truck, runs his rival Belloc off the road, and secures the Ark. This scene does everything an action scene should do. It presents the hero with impossible odds, it allows him to use ingenuity to solve a problem, it delivers fun and danger, and it hammers everything home with a display of unbeatable human spirit. Top that, Temple of Doom. Actually, let's face it, nothing is topping the truck chase, and that's totally fine. Temple of Doom does have some great scenes, though. Indy versus Lao She, the club escape, the bug room, the sacrifice scenes, the battle with the giant, the minecart race that gave us Donkey Kong Country. There's a lot to love here, but the best of the best is when Indy cuts the rope bridge. This is not just an exhilarating, ridiculous spectacle, but it also has plenty of great character moments sprinkled in. First off, you have Short Round encouraging a reluctant Willie to cross the bridge. He starts jumping around and he falls through it in hilarious fashion before she displays courage by immediately hurrying over to help him. I know people hate Willie and I understand where they're coming from, but she has some good moments and this is one of them. Then the scene really heats up once Molaram gets involved. Indy crosses the bridge halfway before bad guys close in from both sides, and he tries to protect his friends, but Molaram refuses to negotiate. This forces Indy to make a bold move. He cuts the bridge in jaw-dropping fashion and turns it into a ladder. And here's where Molaram really shines. He's laughing and killing his own men in an attempt to knock Indy off the ladder, and the two of them battle back and forth over the stones until Indy embraces their power and sends Molaram to the gators. One criticism I will make is that I'm not sure how Indy knows how to use the power of the stones. I'm guessing it had something to do with him being brainwashed earlier in the movie, but it still bothers me just like the close your eyes moment does at the end of Raiders. Aside from that though, this scene is an all-around classic that constantly finds new ways to put pressure on the hero, and it forces him to get creative when the stakes are at their highest. Now we move on to The Last Crusade. With the previous two movies, the best scene was one that showcased action and spectacle, but this time I'm picking one that prioritizes character. It's the scene at the end where Indy and his father choose each other over the Grail. This one kicks off when Elsa attempts to leave with the Holy Grail and causes an earthquake. She loses the Grail, and Indy grabs her before she can fall to her death. But instead of saving herself, she surrenders to her desire for immortality and ends up dying. Then the roles are reversed as Indy finds himself reaching for the treasure while his father tries to reel him in. Indy insists on grabbing it, and that's when Henry calls his son by the name Indiana for the first time and tells him to let the Grail go.
Indiana? Indiana? Let it go.
This is great stuff because both men let it go. Henry had spent his entire life in search of the Grail, while Indy spent his whole life trying to understand his father through archaeology. But here, with the Grail within reach, they choose what's truly important: each other. It's a powerful moment and a perfect way to conclude the franchise. But, of course, then they had to go and make 2 more movies. And that brings us to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. In last week's video, I mentioned that the first half of this one is enjoyable, and the best scene is when we see the return of Indiana Jones. The movie opens with him and his partner being taken to Area 51. They're in the trunk of this car driven by the Russians, and before the bad guys remove Indy from the trunk, they surround the vehicle and ready their guns. And after he's thrown outside, he grabs his hat and gets right back in business. From there on, he has an amusing exchange with his partner and some brief yet effective confrontations with the 2 main villains. I also like Irina Spalko's intro here, and although she didn't wow me over the course of the movie, her intro presents her as this driven and mysterious character. The interactions between her and Indy are great, especially when he refuses to shake her hand and then later resists her psychic powers. Though the overall movie has some issues, this scene is one of the high points, and it accomplishes a lot without feeling messy or overwhelming. Next, we have Dial of Destiny. Some fans enjoy the prologue where we see a younger Indiana Jones in action, but I couldn't get into it. De-aged Harrison Ford was too much of a distraction, and these uncanny valley situations take me right out of a movie. Unfortunately, the rest of the story is a total slog because Indy is old, miserable, and poorly written. There's not much to get fired up about here, but I do like the scene when Indy mocks the main villain for his flawed plan to go back in time. This one occurs right near the end. The villain thinks he's about to return to 1939 to overthrow Hitler, but Indy realizes that they forgot to factor in continental drift when making time travel calculations. It's a classic Indy moment where we see him showing off his smarts while also taunting his enemies, and the scene ends on an ominous note. Finally, we have the Great Circle. I love the storyline in this game. It's a return to form for the franchise, and there are a bunch of great scenes in this one. I went back and forth between several favorites before finally deciding on one that takes place in the middle of the story. So if you haven't played Great Circle and you plan to, consider this your spoiler warning. Anyway, the best scene takes place during the Egypt section of the game. After Indy and his sidekick Gina sneak into a Nazi camp, they break into a building where the villain Emmerich Voss is having an argument with Colonel Gantz. Voss insults the patriotic colonel by accusing him of treason, and it pushes Gantz over the edge, so much so that he attempts to kill Voss. That's when the ceiling collapses. Indy and Gina drop into the picture, and they take control of the situation. From there, Indy and Voss debate archaeology, then Gina demands to know where her sister is. She gets an answer she doesn't like, and during this emotional moment, Voss signals for Gantz to attack. This kicks off a wild sequence where the heroes and villains one-up each other again and again in close quarters. The scene is fun, it's funny, it's unpredictable, it's exactly what I love about the original trilogy, and it keeps you guessing while raising interesting plot questions, delivering emotional weight, and giving each of the 4 major characters a moment to shine. So I hope this helps. Question of the day, in your opinion, what is the best scene from the Indiana Jones franchise? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of any one of my books and be sure to leave reviews on Amazon. The Half Murders is great if you like horror stories. It's about a woman and her daughter who enter a haunted house. They get chopped in half, and for them, the nightmare is only beginning. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe. Maybe support me on Patreon. And as always, remember to keep on writing.